to my face, we said some words in Yiddish, and then to my face, he starts speaking in a sort of like, New York sort of Yiddish accent, and I'm like, did
Sure.
you just do a Jewish and he goes, it's New York, and like he doesn't even know that that's what that is.
My guest today is Avraham Vofsi, a Jewish Australian interdisciplinary artist based in Melbourne. Following a career in filmmaking, Avraham then began oil painting and has since established himself as an important talent on the Australian oil painting scene. His recent accolades include placing as a finalist in both the 2022 Archibald Portrait Prize and the 2022 Darling Portrait Prize. His second and most recent solo exhibition, titled Ba'aret's Portrait of a Land, focuses on Avraham's Jewish identity and building a connection to Israel as a result of the anti-Semitism that he has faced. Avraham, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing?
Good, thank you, Baruch Hashem. It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I'm glad I managed to read that introduction smoothly on the third and final
You
take.
you did great.
Thank you. I needed that. So let's begin with you and who you are. How did you begin your career as an artist?
Well, look, I always get stuck on this one. You did mention it briefly, which is that I grew up being the film kid, sort of how I thought about myself. I made films. I got a camera for my bar mitzvah. Classic Jewish story. If you get a chance to see Steven Spielberg's movie Fablemans,
Oh, that's
the
great.
one
I
sort of
like
he
it.
did kind of a
Yeah.
yeah, right. So that's my life. It's sort of strange. Like it was. We don't need to talk about Steven Spielberg's movie too much, but it was weird how, like, it was really uncomfortable for me to watch because it was so piercingly correct to my life experience, like including like the troubles he had and sort of some of the feelings you have when you're like make a film and then you're sitting there watching people watch it. Like a lot of it was weirdly the same as my life. Not that I'm as good as him at making films, but yeah, so I grew up sort of film kid, classic. I think there's a bunch of filmmakers, Jewish American certainly filmmakers, and probably in England too, who have that camera for their bar mitzvah. No other friends in school other than the ones you convinced to make films with you. I don't know. Was that you? I don't even know. Was that you who
That
had that
wasn't
as
me.
well?
I'm sorry to not make this
Yeah.
relatable at all, but that wasn't mine.
That's kind of. And that's fine. I just wanted to ask. So I double check.
Okay.
So, look, it's interesting. Sometimes I think about it that maybe my original love was, this is how I think about it now. We sort of invent stories about ourselves, but I was originally really, really taken with like painting, oil paintings. My parents took me to one of the national galleries here in Australia. There's a lot of like classical art. For your nerdy fans out there, there's a game called Magic the Gathering. It's like a card game, and it has like very sweet fantasy art on it, like
Yeah.
elves and dragons and stuff. And fantasy art is basically classical art for nerds. And so I think I had that growing up, and I really liked that. And not to go on too long, but I think what happened, which happens to a lot of people, is you're young. And the way that school kind of works is people get put in boxes. And I think what happened to me was I wasn't one of the kids who quote unquote could draw, so I just didn't. I gave up very young, and but luckily my mom was doing her master's. The two things I think to briefly lead me on this sojourn was mom was doing her master's of photography, so there were cameras around, and there was a woman living with us. Like a au pair, like a young woman from Germany who was an exchange student. And she was studying film. So there were just cameras everywhere. And that's what got me into film, I think. Which was my creative outlet for my whole, growing up and through my 20s.
Yeah.
And I lived in LA, and then I came back. I studied drawing and stuff. I was gonna do maybe storyboards or like concept art, something like drawing related, but in film.
Right.
And basically, I got 3 years. I got really burnt out from film, and I just was like, and I started loving sort of drawing, and for the first, it was like, I think it was, turns out anyone can learn how to draw. You
Yeah.
just spend 3 hours a day for 2 years and have all the most excruciating feelings of your life, being like, I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know how to draw. And by the end of that, you don't feel like you can draw. So I think that's what happened. And also just to kind of come back to like any sort of point in this story, one of the teachers that I had at the university is a really, really, really good, amazing oil painter here, based in Melbourne, called Adrian Strapp, and she sort of took me under her wing. Well, she said that she made the mistake of being like, oh, if she gave me her number and was like, oh, if you ever need any help, you just send me a text. And I just like texted her every single day for 8 years. And here I am.
Right.
Like this basically, I have her to thank. She's, she mentored me and really, I just fell in love with oil painting. I think that's what happened. Maybe it was my original love. I came back around to it. I don't know, but that's kind of how I got into painting. So, and then wow, I should stop talking in a minute so we can move on. But the other thing about that question that I always find strange, we only have our own life experiences, right? Like we only have what goes on inside our head, and we try and make connections. But for me, I don't feel like. I mean, I feel like an artist, sure. Like people call me that, and I call myself that. But I just feel like, we're all creative, and I've always just, that's my way of being in the world, is creative, like not creative problem solving exactly, but like my go-to reaction to things, having feelings, ideas, is like, oh, I'll make something about it. I'll make a video when I was younger. Now I'm making art about it. So I think I just always sort of been doing that, my way of sort of interacting with the world, or tackling the world, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I want to know what you were painting when you first got into painting. Because obviously your most recent exhibition, which we'll come on to, looks at themes of Jewish identity. Were you painting about that from the start?
No, yeah, okay. So I think that's an interesting part. So when I started, interesting story, I guess. So when I started painting, the first thing, I got very taken by portraits. So I've painted now 135, 137 portraits, I think. I just got really captivated by portraits and storytelling. Oh yeah, quick aside, I decided the best way for me to learn how to get good at painting was just paint as many things as possible. And so I just set myself this like insane goal of like, I think I painted 30 paintings a year for the first 3 or 4 years. So I just was like,
Good
it's
Lord.
quantity over quality. Yeah. I just, you got to make all your mistakes once. You got to make each mistake there is once to get through all of them. So I thought but no, I think maybe because of my film background, I love stories and I love narrative and I love, engage. Like my favorite thing about making films was, like, I guess being able to tell a story and being able to like work with people. And so maybe that's why I was like just drawn to portraits. And so I just painted a lot of portraits and people I met, various things. Like I painted sort of small business owners that were around me. I painted a lot of performers. But I think sort of what happened was, I mean, there was one pivotal kind of portrait project I made couple of years in, which was a group called Hot Brown Honey. Amazing performance group. They're actually doing a tour in the UK right now. Whenever this comes out, maybe it'll be too late. But they're amazing. They're all First Nation Australian, so not Indigenous Australian. That one of them is a couple of them are Indigenous Australian or Torres Strait Islander. One of them is Samoan. One of them is Tongan. There's the two women lead are Samoan and South African, and their show. They're black. It's political. It's very fun. It's very funny. It's in your face. And I saw their show, and I just was like so taken by it that I reached out to them, and I was like, I have to paint you. I have to do something with you. And we sort of became friends, and I painted portraits of them. And I think working with them and the way that they use their identity and their art to sort of make a point and do sort of talk about social issues. I think talking to Bussy is the name of the woman who's the sort of the two women who started it, one of the two. We talked a lot about how like portraits are sort of inherently political, right? Like you are painting a person, which means you're sort of not painting a different person. And traditionally, there are kinds of people who get painted in galleries and kinds of people who don't. And there are ways that people get painted and ways that they don't, right? Like, and I'm not trying to be vague, like reading between lines, a lot of white guys get painted and a lot of naked women get painted, right? They're like the two kind of broad categories of things that get painted traditionally in classical art. And so you're sort of inherently kind of walking into like the politics of doing it. You sort of, I guess maybe it's the Jew in me, but I don't think you can escape the politics of it, right? And because the Jewish approach is just lean in, right? I guess that's my feeling. It's pretty Jewish to be like, you know what? If the choice is like there's something going on here, just let's dive in. Let's just like see what we can do. And so, point of all of that to say is what happened. What happened was I just was like, great, I'm in, and I painted Indigenous Australians here. There was some protest stuff that was happening. I painted Samoan friends of mine, and like so. I guess what happened was I just started getting more and more interested in like using the idea of portraits to like share stories and therefore identity. How do you see yourself? How do we see ourselves? What's the story we tell? And so I ended up particularly engaging with people who like didn't normally get to be shown on gallery walls, right? Like traditionally. And I guess what happened, and so all that stuff was going on, and I painted essential workers. I don't know what you call them in England, but the people who worked during the COVID lockdowns. Like in Melbourne, we had like 2 years of lockdown. We had like 7 months of lockdowns, I think, accumulatively. So quite intense. So I painted people who worked during those lockdowns and their stories. And but basically, what happened was I realized I was painting everyone else's story except my own, right? And I think so I wasn't painting Jewish stories, which I didn't maybe I wasn't ready for it, or maybe this was like my way back in to start thinking about being Jewish, because it wasn't on my radar there for a while.
Let's talk more about that, because you transition into painting more about yourself, more about the Jewish stories. In your most recent exhibition, what does this look like? What are the paintings about?
Sure. So I mean, just backing up slightly, I made the decision to make Jewish art before I made this exhibition, and my first painting I did as like I've decided, you know what, it's time, roll up my sleeves and make some art about being Jewish. Was the painting that got accepted into the Archibald, which for those who don't know, it's like the biggest portrait competition in Australia. It's held once a year, and considering like Australia, I don't know, Australians love like sports. We love footy. It's kind of also a surprise, but a good surprise, I think, that like the portrait competition makes national news. So it's a big deal every year, and it's kind of fun. And often it's celebrities. It's supposed to be notable Australians. So it'll be people who are on TV or people who did good things during the year, newsworthy. And so I painted my childhood hero, a guy named John Safran, who I think maybe imagine as somewhere between like Louis Theroux and Sacha Baron Cohen. And so some sort of hybrid. he doesn't really do characters, but he's not himself the way that Louis Theroux is. And he has the same kind of politics, and like all of us Jewish boys, dumping straight into the trouble. That's his shtick, I guess. And so I reached out to him and I painted him. That was my first kind of explicitly Jewish bit of art. You know, he's Jewish. He's Jewish on TV. I painted him as King David. It was all out Jewish. So that was like my first attempt, and you can see that it's very similar to the kinds of stuff I was doing before, right? Where it was like a person, portrait, somebody's story, and together we're kind of exploring Jewish stuff. And so I think I mentioned that because I guess it's interesting what ended up happening with the current exhibition, Ba'aretz. So I spent 5 months in Israel last year. I kind of made myself a little art project to help me think about how to think about identity. I was like, great, I'll make an art project about it. Like I said, like that's my way of doing it. And so, it started and I had a lot of ideas that were going to be very similar. Like, oh, I'll talk to a bunch of people and paint some portraits of them. And it's interesting how I hope I was able to capture like the experience of getting connected, because it's quite different. I painted my first landscapes ever. So the portraits are the show is six portraits and 4 landscapes, and it's much more like, I don't know how to use the word esoteric. That's not quite the right word, but it's like it's maybe a bit less literal. Like I was like, I need to explore my Jewish identity, and I don't know what's going to captivate me in Israel, and it ended up being there were some people I met, some friends I made. I painted them sort of like, quote unquote, like man on the street, kind of like simple portraits. Some people I met, some friends I made, some places I went. I painted these landscapes for the first, like, because I felt so connected to I felt so connected to the land. Oh man, I'm struggling with that sentence. I felt so connected to the places I was seeing and the history and the way it moved me, the way the landscape moved me.
You've spoken quite a bit about how your Jewish identity has influenced your most recent exhibition, and you've mentioned before that the decision to do this was in part influenced by anti-Semitism that you have faced. You also mentioned that your upbringing was somewhat similar to Steven Spielberg's Fabelmans. What is some of the anti-Semitism that you have faced, and how has it influenced your art?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. I'm sure you get this with a lot of people you talk to because, this podcast and what you're doing is about tackling anti-Semitism, but we can't let anti-Semitism define what it means for us to be Jewish. So I think, so it's like, it's a tricky one. But yeah, I mean, I think there is something about the experience that we have with anti-Semitism that it's like what's like a chrysalis. It's like it clarifies something for us, in a way that I think maybe, at least for me, was really helpful. It was sort of like, I think I'm going to be quoting myself from the movie that I made, but I think there's like, it's like you get targeted with anti-Semitism. This is the particular thing that happened that led me to the Israeli, like going to Israel. It's like people would come at me with all that kind of, that bullshit, like sorry, I shouldn't swear. They came at me with the sort of like,
bleep it out.
that kind of stuff. I mean, look, let's be real. It's just like anti-Semitism dressed up as weird phrases about Israel and whatever weird stuff that they've heard. And it's really intense and really confronting. And it's sort of like, if that's how you see me, then like I did with the other portrait thing, like, we have that weird habit of leaning into the politics. So it's like, if that's how you see me, then I better work out what that means for myself. Like, I better work out. So maybe that's how, in that particular bit of anti-Semitism, triggered me, like initiated this art project. It's like in response, like, oh, I better work this out for myself. But growing up here, it's weird here. Like I actually, I don't know. I think you mentioned. I don't know if you mentioned this, that I'm in Ben's book. What, we mentioned that already? We're going to talk
I
about
was going to get onto it.
Okay.
We can talk about it now.
Well, okay. I guess I would just I just was going to say that like I felt weird even when Ben and I were talking about being in his book because I felt like my
Ben and Freeman, friend of the podcast.
friend of the
Go on.
podcast and lucky enough to call my own friend as well. He the fact that he would be interested, my story doesn't feel very interesting, but maybe it is, and maybe that speaks to like the way anti-Semitism manifests here, which is very subtle, very low level. Like we don't have, I mean, I think in his first book, in Ben's first book, he does actually interview another person from Australia, and they grew up in a country town, and they got a lot more violence than I got. I got some violence, but it's not like it is in America. It's not like it is in France. You know, it's a lot more um, low key, subtle. It's weird because um, it people are not very. I mean, plenty of people are religious and they're Christian, and those people sort of like not say that those people are gonna be anti-Semitic, but they're at least because they know a bit more about Christianity, their own culture. They also know about some of where the tropes about Jews come from. Whereas there are
Right.
I know so many people here who have that sort of, my grandparents were Catholic, maybe, and then this is like a very common in Australia. There'll be like English Irish heritage that came out here with the convicts. Their grandparents were the last people in their family to like these people our age. They you know they would go to church or something, and then the people our age as parents wouldn't. They would grow up quote unquote atheist, and then there'd be people our age, and so you get these people who just don't have any knowledge about. I mean, history is one way of talking about it, but like this particular part of history, um, so they're sort of ignorant, because they feel like, well, I don't believe in whatever. I don't feel religious, therefore I don't need to know about this stuff. But they still end up manifesting all of this. Like they still are raised in the same soup that we're all raised in, and so you get this weird thing of people are simultaneously sort of ignorant about Jews. They don't even like, and there aren't that many Jews here. Firstly, so they're ignorant about Jews, and then they're ignorant about like these tropes that they still might say. So that, I guess that's what I'm trying to say. It's this weird combination of like, some people are just ignorant and are curious. Some people, it'd be like they won't know anything about Jews except for like the first thing that they know about Jews will be some stereotype. Like that,
Sure.
that'll just be like the first thing that they know. So it's a weird one here, and I know a lot of Jewish people now. Now I'm older and I've got more Jewish friends who like, compared to other places, it's super chill. I should say that. I want to be clear that like I experience a lot of anti-Semitism, but for lots of people, they just don't. You can construct a
Yeah.
life here, especially if you have a life that mostly has Jews in it. You can pretty much get away with like not experiencing that much anti-Semitism, which is cool. I mean, that's a blessing, right? But it's if you're not surrounded, what happened to me was that I wasn't surrounded by Jews, and so you're very isolating. And when you're isolated, that's when the stuff can kind of come out. And so, growing up, I got some physical violence. I got a lot of Jew jokes, kind of that stuff, and a lot of stuff, interestingly, that was like anti-American in the sense of like they wouldn't use the word Jew. And I don't even know if they would know that this is what they're saying. Like, this is the thing that they're expressing. But they would make fun of the way I speak, Or they would make fun of,
Right.
or it's like, they would say things that were about who I am, or like the way I am. And it would be like, because you're American. And then you just think about this, right? You're American. You're loud. You're nosy. You're like, I'm trying to think of other things, but it's just all the things people say about
Right.
Jews. And then
Yeah, you're just like, just call me Jewish.
just call me Jewish, right? Except they don't even know that that's what's happening. That's the thing. I think like a couple of weeks ago, somebody to my face, we said some words in Yiddish, and then to my face, he starts speaking in a sort of like, New York sort of Yiddish accent, and I'm like, did you just do a Jewish like? And he goes, it's New York, and like he doesn't even know that that's what that is. And he later felt bad and apologized, which is also a very big surprise. I didn't expect him to. And he was like, he was like really, really ashamed he didn't realize what he was doing. So there's like a lot of that where it's like they don't know,
Yeah.
you know, and it just call me Jewish, and then what's the other, and then like the I don't know the blonde, blue-eyed kid who's also got American parents or whatever doesn't get teased for being American. So
Sure.
so that was like a
Wow.
thing that was growing up. I think like the people here. Yeah, that's a weird one. Um, yeah, it's strange. And look, and then we have like, look, I will say we also have like your standard stuff. There's all the crazy stuff on college campuses, and through the sort of newspaper around Israel. I mean, we had like a neo-Nazis protesting like 3 days ago. So that's kind of more recent though. I feel like that's this like COVID thing. I mean, it's not recent in the sense of there have always been right-wing extremists in this country, but they've been
Yeah.
like in lots of ways are less visible, I think. Um, yeah,
Well, there have been recent moves by various Australian states to ban the swastika and to ban
yeah,
public displays of the swastika. Does this, as a
yeah.
Jewish person in Australia, does this make you feel any safer or anything like that?
I don't want to be too controversial in case because I mean that's the thing is the people who are pushing that. I mean, I assume are Jewish. Now I think about it, it could be non-Jews or anyway. I know there are people, members of the community, who feel strongly that's a good move. I'm not 100% convinced it is because it does feel like it just pushes the problem under the rug. Isn't like that? It's like isn't that a big tactic of all of those right wing groups to like use coded messages and stuff? So it's like, yeah, okay, sure. I guess banning the swastika sends a message. I don't know. I don't think it would actually make me feel safer. It would just make me feel like that there are still a bunch of Nazis or neo Nazis around who are just not going to publicly do it. Right? Doesn't
Right,
mean
and they get shoved to the side to the corners of the internet or something like that.
yeah, which is already kind of the thing that it's been like in Australia. Like, and I would imagine it's similar maybe in UK and in the US where it's like certainly after the war, there's that whole like, well, anti-Semitism is over, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
it's not.
yeah,
You know,
yeah. Let me ask you. I see you're currently wearing a kippah. Have you always been a visible Jewish person, or was this something you chose to embrace later on?
yeah, that was later on. So it was not. It was interesting just reflecting. When I was 13, 14. I guess it was around my bar mitzvah right afterwards. I started growing my hair long, and I used like those big Bukharisha kippot,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Yes.
I wore that every day for a year, but I would tell people I if they would mention the hat, I'd say like the kippah, I would be like, well, it's just to keep the hair out of my eyes. So I was weirdly doing it,
Okay.
but then also
Yeah.
walking it back at the same time, and I think that was a lot of like how I was protecting myself,
Right.
And I even wore a giant Star of David for a little bit as well, but they didn't last long. And so this round of it, and then I didn't for a long time. But yeah, I did this. I started wearing my kippah before May 2021 when all the stuff happened online and every young Jewish person in the world changed all their life. I assume it, every
The
single person,
stuff.
that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all know what it
Yeah.
is. So it was about a few months before that.
Yeah.
And I'd sort of already started this journey, and I thought, yeah, and I remember being petrified. I was like, I'm really worried about this. I don't know how people are gonna react. And yeah, and then I think that's what made me do it. And I was like, well, if that's how I feel, then then I have to do it just to see what.
Yeah. Um, that's really interesting because it has been a sort of theme of the podcast. I've noticed that I speak to guests about receiving anti-Semitism or witnessing anti-Semitism, and rather than make them back away from their
Yeah.
Judaism, it actually makes them embrace it more, which is kind of the opposite of what the anti-Semites wanted in the first place.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's good.
I
mean,
it is no. It's,
weird. I guess it's good you can find anything good from it, right? That's maybe the
it is.
yeah.
Yeah, and everyone has their own journey that they're going to go on.
Totally.
You said that in about your exhibition, you wrote how it was in part inspired by your trying to, quote, understand what it means to be Jewish after years of internalized anti-Semitism. Internalized anti-Semitism, pretty much like, the big theme of Ben M. Freeman's second book, friend of the podcast, and who you are featured in that book. What does internalized anti-Semitism look like for you? Because it looks different for so many people.
Totally. Well, obviously, I don't want to say too much because you got to go out. Everyone's got to go out and buy Ben's book. But I get. Yeah, I was thinking about this because, and maybe this is the thing that Ben responded to. Ben and Freeman, friend of the podcast. That maybe this is the thing that was interesting about my story, which was that, like, on the one hand, I always knew I was Jewish. My mom, both my parents are Jewish, but my mom is very, like, she grew up in, they both grew up in America. Dad not so much doing Jewish stuff, but mom doing Jewish stuff. Her grandmother was in, like, the Communist Party, like that flavor of, like, East Coast Jew, that thing. Yeah. And so I grew up with that. We did say that, so I did my bar mitzvah at this Reform shul where I live, but so on the one hand, knew I was Jewish, and definitely that was a part of who I was, and I put it sort of out there. I couldn't escape it. I knew I was, but I think the way it manifested for me was that I literally couldn't be around other Jews. There was something about it where, like, some part of it was too hard to face, or that, like, when I'm around other Jews, it's not like, and it was like, because you're young, like, I don't think I could have articulated why I felt uncomfortable, but it was like, when it was just me, then I could control it in a way. I could be like, okay, this is what it means to be Jewish. And that's how I present myself, blah, 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 right? Whereas as soon as I'm around other Jews, or I'm doing Jewish programs, or I go to synagogue, or whatever it is, or I'm literally in a friendship group with a second Jew, like, all of a sudden, I don't know exactly what I was worried about, or, like, did I have these feelings of animosity? I don't know. I do remember that, like, there were, like, 4 Jewish people in kind of my 2 years. It wasn't a big school, but there were really not very many Jews. And I remember specifically this dynamic, which was that, like, one, we never talked about being Jewish with each other. Ever. And 2, I don't know if any of us were friends, because we all sort of had to distance ourselves and or bully each other so that we didn't get, like, it was a very weird, up until my first Jewish friend, it was when I was 16. She came from one of the Jewish schools. She came to this school. We became really, really good friends. But I don't think we ever talked about anything, even her. We never talked about anything Jewish. And so, God, it just makes me a bit uncomfortable, like, to think about. Like, there's something really intense about it, but in this, like, really hard to, like, articulate way. Like, God, maybe I just was, like, so terrified all the time, and it's like that, like, somehow I'd be found out in some way that wasn't good, or, like, it's that kind of anti-Semitism that, like, it just turns on you in a moment, right? So that you're like, maybe that's pretty common for most people, where it's like, unless you're in a really dangerous situation, it comes out of nowhere. And so maybe that was the thing, was like, the more Jews I was around, the more possible that kind of thing would happen or something. I don't know. Yeah. So it wasn't like, I know people have more, like, tangible things. I mean, I hated the way I looked. I hated my hairy body, and I hated my, like, my nose is not that big, but whatever. Like, I didn't think that was like a big thing. Like, that's certainly, like, a very clear manifestation of, like, I remember in Ben's book about, like, the sort of racialization. It's like, and you just sort of don't like Jewish beauty standards or whatever. Like, you have this other view. So that, but I think that mostly it was this dynamic of just being separated from Jews. Just being like, I can't be around Jews.
That's really interesting because there's kind of this element of like you said when you're by yourself you know you're fine. It's like when you're by yourself you can package your Judaism however you want and you can present it to the outside world however you want. But if you're kind of seen to be associated with other Jewish people, there's kind of this thing of like these other Jewish people are affecting the way people see me. They are bringing me down, and I can't control that.
Wow, yeah, that's really intense. Yeah, and I think it's also there's this where yeah, it's like God, that's so real. It's like this thing where it's like yeah, it's they're bringing me down, and I'm like immediately in danger. I'm like in like group of Jews. It's like prime targeting or something, you know? It's like, and yeah, you know,
Yeah,
and I, like you said, like I could package it, like I could be like, I'm sure I said all the random that crap we all say, like, oh, I'm not. I'm Jewish. You like I probably said that,
sure.
or I probably said, well, I don't believe in like whatever. I don't get like I'm probably said all of those things where I'd be like, yeah, where I could like make it work for me. I'm sure I'd made a lot of Jewish jokes. I think I don't know remember what Ben calls it, like weaponizing or like you know I could get in front of people. Maybe that's the other problem with other Jews around is like if I'm the only Jew around, I can get in front of all the Jew jokes. I can make them
Yeah.
faster and better. I can kind of manipulate the situation so that I don't have to. Yeah,
And there's this, yeah, when you're doing that, there's kind of this thing of like, you can joke about me being Jewish. I'm cool with it. I
yeah,
know it's something to be made fun of. Don't worry, I'm with you guys.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it's yeah, or like or like it gets worse when you target the other Jew. It's like, well, I'm laughing. We're here on the inside laughing at that other, you know, whatever.
Right.
Yeah, which happened. I
Sure.
remember that was like that's probably one of the things I feel like the most shame about. I had this like one, like shame whatever. Like we're all kids, but like there was this one other guy, and he got picked on so much because he was like more Jewish than me in the sense of like his nose was bigger, or like whatever. Like it was just like it was harder for him, and I just like wish that I could like go back in time and like work out a way to reach out to him, but you know, it's
Well, that's, that this is part of your journey,
yeah,
kind of like you haven't. I think the important thing is it's not that you're remembering that and being like, oh well,
yeah.
you're kind of like you do feel bad. You are using this in some way. Was there suddenly like a moment when you realized that you were experiencing internalized anti-Semitism, or was it kind of more of a long, drawn out process?
Um, I think it was yeah. I guess it was like it's a drawn out process. I think honestly, my belief is that we all suffer from it. Every Jew in the world, including all the Jews in Israel, we all suffer from it to some capacity. It just manifests in different ways, in different amounts over our lifetime, and you know because we live in this globally connected world where we are a very small minority, and there's a whole bunch of people who like have some pretty weird views about us. So like we can't help it. Like you know, we all kind of take it on in some way. And so I think for me, it feels like a lifelong journey, but it does have moments, you know, like, and I think especially since doing this art project and coming back from Israel, like, and in Israel, like, there's you have to like, maybe you have to like do a thing to get a moment of clarity. Like, it was going to Israel and like being around, it was like two simultaneous events, which is like one, you know, the thing about how like everyone in Israel is like insanely gorgeous, like that thing, right? So that's part one of the feeling, and then part two, which was a very like you don't like anyone who hasn't been, you go like you know it as a joke, but when you go, you understand what we mean. Like it's intense in a good way, but the way it plays into I think my feeling about internalized anti-Semitism was like the first thought is like the standard. I think first thought for me is like they're gods and goddesses. They are. Well, this is all Greek stuff. God, I was gonna say Adonises, but I don't know what the Jewish term is. But you know, they're all very handsome and very good looking, and we're not, right? We as schlubby diaspora Jews look like potato farmers or whatever, right? I can't keep, that's somebody else's joke that I stole, but like whatever, like that's the thing, and so that's like that's the first experience. But I think, and this is where like having a really intense experience, you kind of almost can't get away from the reality, which is that like I had that feeling, and then the other feeling I had was I'm finally in a place where everyone looks like me, right? You know, I suddenly don't feel like embarrassed about my hairy everything. Not to be too explicit, but like, you know, hairy chest, hairy shoulders, like whatever.
Let's keep it
Like,
PG, yeah.
sorry, yeah, hairy shoulders. I don't know what you were thinking. And but you know, everyone looks like everyone has like curly hair like us, and had, you know, whatever, like, you know, like people look like us in this way that I had never experienced before because I didn't grow up around Jews. So, and also like it's um and so okay, so those two feelings, right? This is the thing about this is where I realized I was carrying on the internalized anti-Semitism, which is like these people look amazing, and I look like these people. Like, I'm not
Right.
saying I'm handsome, but it's like, you can't, I suddenly couldn't get away from this thing, which is like, wait a minute, maybe I've been carrying around this image in my head that I'm an ugly sack of crap, you know, because I don't fit into the, you know, I grew up in Australia. Everyone is 6'3". I feel like I have a short complex because everyone is 6'3". Everyone has blonde hair and blue eyes and like looks like a surfer. Like, obviously, when you don't think about it, you're sort of like, oh, then I must be terrible looking or something, you know? And so I think that
Because
was
you're Jewish.
because I'm Jewish. Like
Right.
explicit, like specifically the things that you would categorize as like very Jewish features. And so, yeah, so I think that was like a moment where I had this big clarity of like, that's some internalized anti-Semitism, my view about myself and not being very good looking, that like by witnessing how amazing looking people are in Israel and the fact that I look like these people, it's like me and you, like we all do. Like it's not like I'm not saying I'm handsome, other people aren't. It's like Jews do. This is what Jews look like. That I suddenly could be like, maybe I don't have to think about that about myself anymore. Like that's just a bit of messaging I don't need anymore. And it still comes up for me for sure, but it doesn't. I can catch it way quicker now, and I notice it, and I'm like, you know what? Maybe that's a feeling that I don't need to have anymore. So that's like a very explicit moment.
Yeah, and the you know, there's also something to be said for the fact that when you are there, it's not just like there's a lot of Jewish people. There's a lot of Jewish people like, you know, doing cool things and
Yeah,
prominent positions of whatever.
yeah,
They're not like being. There's not like four of them being bullied. Um,
correct. Yeah, 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 yeah. I can't. My first day there or something. I was like about to go on birth, right? And so, but I got in early because I had to. It doesn't matter. A really boring story. Point is, I was there, and and I had like that diaspora mode, which was, oh, I wonder if that person's Jewish. I wonder if that person's Jewish. But the answer is always yes. Or like, oh, hey,
yes,
that's a
you're in,
kippah. That's cool. Or like, oh, that's a mezuzah. That's interesting. And it's like, no,
yeah,
every single, like every security guard is Jewish. Every cop or every like person at a bank or like, oh, well, what
right.
is it? 7 out of every 9 people. But like, the point is like, it's just way, way more than you're used to in every single category. Like you're saying, it's not just the yeah, it's just such a broad spectrum. You know, it's eye opening to be like, oh, this is what it means to be Jewish. Any of these things, you
Yeah,
know?
and if you know, bullying happens everywhere, but if it's happening in Israel, it's probably not because they're Jewish.
That's the thing. That's the one thing that they don't get there is, you know, they're not getting bullied because they're Jewish.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, wow. So that's really. It sounds like you've gone on quite a journey, and I this was documented in friend of the podcast Ben M. Freeman's most recent book, Reclaiming Our Story: The Pursuit of Jewish Pride. Ben has been on the podcast twice, and we actually held a live event with him in London earlier this year. How did you end up being interviewed for his book?
I'm just as total nerd, and often when I finish a book that really means something to me, like that one, for example, his first book, Jewish Pride, um, I just message or email the authors. I'll be like, "This was
That's
so
sweet.
yeah."
That's
Like I
very
did it
sweet.
with Dara Horn's book. I did it with Douglas Rushkoff's books. Like just anytime because it's like the
Dara
sense
Horn,
like,
friend of the podcast.
oh, is she good? Good. She should as so she
Yeah,
should be.
yeah.
Yeah. Like yeah. I just writers don't get a lot of I don't get enough fan mail. I think because writing a book is a it's a weighty endeavor, and when you read it, I think when something speaks to you, it's so intimate in a way because you're just with it's just your brain and the words for like 10 hours, 10 20 hours, 10 weeks, whatever long it takes you. So anyway, so yeah, I just reached out and we just kind of struck up a bit of a friendship, and we were chatting on Instagram, and then he did a call out for possible subjects, and I was like, this is weird, but I'll put my hand up, and yeah, we had a chat, and apparently my story is interesting enough. Although I will say, I don't know which order you should do it in, but his book finishes before I had been to Israel. So you get everything up to, and all the epiphanies I had up to the decision to go to Israel. But if you want what I realized afterwards, you have to go to my website and check out my art.
Oh my gosh!
Cliffhanger.
It's kind of
yeah, this is good.
There is a cliffhanger. That's actually really interesting because I think reading the book, we are under the impression that all of his interviewees have overcome, as you know, I say overcome internalized anti-Semitism, but I do agree with you that to some extent, most, if not all, Jewish people do to some extent, feel the effects of it. But I think we're under the impression that for the most part, everyone's sort of like got over the bulk of it. But that's really interesting to hear that you were interviewed and then you went to Israel and then you had this other really big kind of moment.
Many of them, really. Like it was.
What was your mindset in regard to internalized anti-Semitism whilst he was interviewing you?
I mean, I think what was really good about Ben was he really opened my eyes to like some of the ways that I had been targeted for being Jewish that like I didn't realize. I think like all of the stuff about being racialized, like the way I look, like I didn't understand how much that played into like the fact that I was Jewish. And also that whole thing that that thing about ostracizing myself from other Jews, I didn't realize I did that until I talked to him. So I think what was amazing with him was the process of talking to him and having him like explain a lot of what goes on and bring in his own experience and the different people he talked to really helped me sort of unpack a lot more about what was going on. I think maybe it almost got me in a way like it got me ready. It was like the foundational work. Because I think when he chatted to me, I already sort of decided to go to Israel. So, but it was the foundational work that when I got to Israel, it was like I was thinking of things that I hated myself for left, right, and center. As in, like, I was picking up internalized anti-Semitism, both from me and other people around me, that I had, like, was able to start tackling. Like I don't know, if I hadn't talked to him before, I don't know if I would have had that epiphany about the way people look, the way Jews look, for example. Or, like, I'm trying to think of some other ones. But, I mean, yeah, maybe if I don't know, like that thing about like separating himself from other Jews, like I ended up going to synagogue a bunch when I was in Israel, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is not scary. It's very easy to make friends. Like it was this whole, so I think that was maybe what the experience with Ben was a really awesome primer,
Yeah.
And actually, that's interesting. Yeah. Maybe I should talk to the other subjects to see if that's a similar experience where like, it's like a springboard.
I would think so. I would think so. What are you hoping that people take away from your story?
Part of me is like, if anyone gets anything from my work and my story, God bless you. That is good enough, But
sure.
But I do have an answer for you. I did think about it, but I think. Oh, I say that because, whatever people get from it, if somebody gets anything, here's a request. If anyone sees the work and gets anything from it, please reach out because there's nothing I love more than like finding out what other people bring, because that's the thing about art. You bring your own experience, and maybe that's what my art is. All of it is an invitation, to bring whatever you bring, I invite you to come into the art space and then have whatever feelings you want. And so I think with this one, maybe the invitation is about, um, it's an invitation to work out how to connect deeper with um, our Jewish civilization. Like for me, the key takeaway or the key moment for me was this idea of like we are all connected as Jewish people to this vastly long, hugely rich 4,000-year tradition, right? And it was eye-opening for me that it's like a limitless possibility scape. That's not a real word, but like a limitless um, way that you could connect and like get connected to your ancestors and the history and the culture and the language, like whatever it is to you. Like there's so many different parts that speak to all the different people. And so it was like going to Israel was like made me realize that like we all have this huge inheritance that we are get to be a part of and we get to tap into, and that the particular experience I have as a person born in Australia that's Ashkenazi, that's has like American parents who came over from Eastern Europe 3 generations ago fleeing the pogroms. That is, in a way, there's lots of things that are good about that, but in a way, it's less important than not less important, but we're all connected, and it's the larger story of the whole people that we all are able to have as an inheritance, and that it's for me connecting to it was hugely powerful, and it's just the start of the journey for me. And I think maybe that's the invitation is for anyone else if they want to reflect on any other ways that they like to be connected, because I think that's maybe what I got from it was it's like a well that you no drink from. The more you dive in, the more it fills you up. That's my feeling about it, and it's been so powerful for me that I would love other people to um, I mean, it's not like go to Israel, but if you've never been, you should try. But it's anything about being Jewish, I think that's the power. And even I will say, I know you have non-Jewish people who listen to this podcast. A broader theme, a friend of mine who's dear friend of mine who's Māori, like Indigenous New Zealand.
Oh
She's
yeah.
she says, often talking to white people, she says everyone's from somewhere, So I think. And there was a guy who came to visit my show yesterday. We had a huge chat. He's English Irish heritage, and he sort of felt bad. He felt a bit jealous almost that I had this thing that I could connect. We have this thing that we can connect to, and that he doesn't. And I just think that whatever you make of it, everyone is from somewhere, and I think that's how we are as humans. That's part of the human experience. Is that's how we see the world, is we are from a place, and getting connected to that place and the ancestors who are from that place, it helps us navigate the world in a sort of in a stronger way, in a more confident way.
Well, your family literally has navigated the world. It's gone from Eastern Europe to America to Australia. So it's actually very, very a good metaphor for your journey, I think. I want to ask you a question now that I ask all of our guests. If someone who is not Jewish approaches you and says that they want to help in the fight against anti-Semitism, where should they start?
Yeah, well, I tell everyone to read Dara Horn's book or listen to the podcast, friend of the podcast, her podcast, because
it's
an amazing book. It's a great read. It's kind of fun, which I think helps, but it's also mind-bendingly sort of. I think to abstract it slightly, the thing that non-Jews can do is learn more about anti-Semitism. And what's great about her books is it really helps you unpack the sort of way that it's embedded in the fabric, which makes it hard for non-Jewish people to see sometimes, and also the many faces of it. And it's a good way in because it's a bit of fun, and because she's like a really good writer. And so I think that's like a good, I guess the place to start is by learning more about anti-Semitism. I think that's probably the key thing. And then um, when you feel confident, what's that thing you do? Pull your mate aside, like call out, not calling out, but like talking to your non-Jewish friends when they say something weird. I think that's like that's the thing that non-Jews can do to help us. That's my feeling.
Well, I kind of like what you said earlier. You know, the thing that happened a few weeks ago. Your friend does kind of a stereotypical Jewish New York accent. You took him aside and you're like, "Hey, just so you know, that wasn't that cool." And he felt bad. He was like, "Oh God, I'm so sorry." So I think a lot of people, you got to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Totally.
I have faith in people that they are going to feel bad, and they will, if they realize they've hurt you, they're going to try and make amends. Before we sign off, please tell the listeners. What have you got going on? What have you got coming up? And where can people find you?
Okay. Well, let's see. What have I got going on? Well, so I've just finished my giant solo show, so you can check it out on my website, which is just my name, avrahamvofsi.com, or my Instagram, which is also my name, Avraham Vofsi. So I think that's where you can find me, and also you can see the artwork that we spoke about, and the video, the documentary I made about my experience there. And that's where you can also keep up to date, because Instagram is the only one I can manage, so Instagram's where it's at.
All right.
I don't know what I have coming up yet. I think I need a holiday, although I just need like a little bit of rest. I'm making Aliyah, so that's my next big move. Yeah,
that's amazing.
Thank you. That's thank you so much. So I think that's what's going to happen is in a couple of months I will make Aliyah, and then I'll start making some work, whatever it shall be over there. I don't know what else. I'm always up for a commission. So if people like, just to be clear, if people want that, I'm always happy to chat. It's always a fun thing to do. And what else? Oh, very important. Very excited about making a Jewish family, and I'm single. So any prospective matchmakers out there, you know, it's very important. That's why we all moved to Israel. Just saying.
You should go on season 2 of Jewish Matchmaking.
Don't think I haven't thought about it. Don't think I haven't thought about it.
Avraham Vofsi, thank you so much for coming on Podcast Against Anti-Semitism.
Complete pleasure. Thank you so much.